I was nobody special. Just another nurse working the graveyard shift at Desert Valley Medical Center in Phoenix, Arizona, trying to pay off student loans and keep my elderly mother's prescriptions filled. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 32 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I understood how the world worked. I believed in science, in protocols, in the sterile certainty of medical procedures. I went to church on Sundays because it made my mother happy, sang the hymns without really thinking about the words, and considered faith something comforting but ultimately separate from the real mechanics of existence. I was wrong about everything. What happened to me on the night of October 15th changed not just what I believe, but what I know to be true about reality itself. This isn't a story about religion or science. It's about the moment when both of those inadequate frameworks shattered completely, and I was left standing in the ruins, faced with a truth so immense that my mind still struggles to contain it. If you've ever felt like there's something more, something hidden just beyond the veil of ordinary life, then what I'm about to tell you will confirm your deepest intuitions. If you've ever wondered whether we're truly alone in this universe, or whether the divine is real, or whether everything you've been told about the nature of existence might be a carefully constructed lie, then you need to hear what happened to me. Because on that October night, I didn't just meet something from beyond our world. I encountered two impossible things, and the connection between them revealed a secret that powerful forces have spent millennia trying to keep hidden. This is my testimony. This is what they don't want you to know. Before we go any further into this story, I want to take a moment to talk directly to you. If you're watching this video, you're already someone who questions the official narratives, someone who senses that there's more to reality than we're being told. You're part of a community of truth seekers, people who aren't satisfied with easy answers and comfortable lies. This channel exists to share real stories from real people who've experienced the extraordinary, the forbidden, the carefully suppressed truths that challenge everything we think we know. If these stories resonate with you, if you want to be part of this community of awakened minds, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. Every subscription helps us reach more people who are ready to hear these testimonies, more souls who are searching for authentic truth in a world full of deception. And if this story moves you, touches something deep inside you, please leave a like. It's a small gesture, but it helps this message reach others who desperately need to hear it. We're building something important here, a space where the silenced can speak and the hidden can be revealed. I'm grateful you're here. Now let me tell you exactly what happened on that October night, and why nothing has been the same since. October in Phoenix is still warm, the desert heat lingering even as autumn settles over the rest of the country. I remember the weather that night with perfect clarity because I stood outside the hospital's ambulance bay during my break, letting the dry wind move across my face, tasting the dust and creosote, watching the lights of the city spread out below. Desert Valley Medical Center sits on the northern edge of Phoenix, where the suburbs start giving way to raw desert, and on clear nights you can see mountains dark against the star-filled sky. I'd worked at the hospital for 7 years, ever since finishing my nursing degree at Arizona State. The graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., paid slightly better than day shifts, and the patient load was usually lighter. Fewer administrators walking the halls, fewer family members crowding the waiting rooms, just the essential staff keeping the machinery of healing running through the dark hours. I liked the quiet competence of night work, the way a good team could function with minimal communication, everyone knowing their role, moving through procedures with practiced efficiency. That night started like any other. I clocked in at 10:45, got my assignment from the charge nurse, a stoic woman named Patricia, who'd been working nights for 20 years and had seen everything the desert could throw at an emergency department. I was assigned to the trauma bay, which meant I'd be handling whatever came through those doors: car accidents from the I-17, construction injuries, the occasional assault or overdose. Phoenix nights brought a predictable rhythm of human catastrophe, and I'd learned to navigate it with professional detachment. My first patient that night was a teenager who'd crashed his motorcycle on Carefree Highway, road rash and a possible concussion, more scared than seriously hurt. After that, a middle-aged man with chest pain that turned out to be severe heartburn, then an elderly woman with a urinary tract infection whose family had panicked when she became confused. Routine cases, handled efficiently, charted properly, nothing that stood out. Around 2:30 in the morning, during the quietest hours when even the emergency department settles into a lull, I was restocking supplies in the trauma bay when I heard the ambulance bay doors burst open. Not the controlled opening they usually made when paramedics brought in a patient, but a violent crash like someone had slammed into them with desperate force. I dropped the box of gauze I was holding and ran toward the beep sound. What I saw in those first seconds didn't make sense. A man was stumbling through the doors, supporting someone or something draped in what looked like a silver thermal blanket, the kind we used for hypothermia patients. But the figure he was carrying seemed wrong, the proportions off, the way. It moved not quite human. The man himself looked terrified, his eyes wild, his clothes dirty like he'd been crawling through the desert. He saw me and lunged forward, nearly dropping his burden, and I instinctively moved to help, my training overriding my confusion. "Please," he was saying, over and over. "Please, you have to help. It's dying. I found it in the desert. It's dying." His voice carried a Mexican accent, thick with panic and exhaustion. As I got closer, reaching out to help support the weight he was carrying, the thermal blanket slipped, and I saw what was underneath. "I want you to understand that I am a rational person. I have a bachelor's degree in nursing. I've been trained to observe, to diagnose, to respond to medical emergencies with calm efficiency. I don't believe in things I can't see and measure, or at least I didn't. But what I saw when that blanket fell away was not human." The face that looked up at me was elongated, with large almond-shaped eyes that reflected the fluorescent lights of the emergency department with an almost metallic sheen. The skin was smooth, grayish-blue, with a texture like dolphin skin, neither scales nor quite like mammalian flesh. The head was larger than a human head in proportion to the body, which was thin, almost frail-looking, with long, delicate fingers that had too many joints. It was breathing, or doing something like breathing, its chest rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed too fast, too shallow. And it was injured. There was a wound on its side, a deep laceration that oozed something that wasn't quite blood, more like a luminescent fluid that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the ambulance bay. My mind went blank. Not from fear exactly, but from the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. Every framework I had for understanding reality simply shut down, unable to process the information my eyes were sending. I stood frozen for what was probably only seconds but felt like minutes, staring at this being, this impossible thing that couldn't exist but was dying right in front of me. The man who'd carried it in grabbed my arm, his grip desperate. "Please, you're a nurse, right? You have to help." I found it in the desert near Lake Pleasant. It was lying there next to something that looked like a crashed vehicle, some kind of metal craft, half buried in the sand. "I'm a construction worker. I was driving home late from a job site in Wickenburg, and I saw lights, strange lights, and then I found it. It's alive. It's hurt. Please." His words tumbled out in a rush of Spanish-accented English, and I could see he was trembling, whether from fear or adrenaline or the sheer weight of what he'd witnessed. I couldn't tell. I looked down at the being again. Its large eyes were moving, tracking between me and the man, and there was something in that gaze, something that communicated awareness, intelligence, and unmistakable pain. Whatever this was, it was suffering. And in that moment, my training kicked in. It didn't matter that this patient wasn't human. It didn't matter that everything I thought I knew about biology and medicine and the universe itself was being challenged. What mattered was that a living, conscious being was dying in front of me, and I had the skills, to potentially help. I looked around quickly. The ambulance bay was empty except for us, and through the small window in the door that led to the main emergency department, I could see the usual late-night skeleton crew going about their routines, unaware of what was happening 20 feet away. How I made a decision that would change my life forever. "We can't take it inside," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "If anyone sees this, they'll call the authorities. And I don't know what happens then, but I don't think it's good for your friend here." I used the word friend intentionally, acknowledging the being's personhood, and I saw something like relief cross the construction worker's weathered face. "There's a storage room right through there, where we keep extra equipment. Help me get it inside." Together we half-carried, half-dragged the being through the ambulance bay into a small storage area that I knew wasn't used much during night shifts. It was cluttered with old gurneys, outdated monitors, boxes of supplies waiting to be catalogued, but it had a door that locked and no windows. I cleared a space on an old gurney, and we lifted the being onto it as gently as we could. Up close, I could see more details that my mind struggled to categorize. The being was wearing something, a garment that looked like it might be some kind of suit, made from a material I didn't recognize, something between fabric and metal, form-fitting and covering most of its body except where the injury had torn through. The wound itself was worse than I'd initially thought, a deep gash that ran along its left side, exposing internal structures that didn't match anything in human anatomy. Instead of bones and organs as I understood them, there seemed to be a network of crystalline structures, pulsing faintly with that same luminescent fluid that was leaking from the wound. I grabbed supplies from the storage shelves around us, working on instinct more than knowledge. Sterile gauze, saline solution, a suture kit, though I had no idea if any of this would help, or if I was just going through the motions of familiar procedures because my mind couldn't conceive of what else to do. "What's your name?" I asked the construction worker, needing to ground myself in something normal, something human. "Rodrigo," he said. "Rodrigo Castillo. I work construction, like I said. I live in Peoria with my wife and 3 kids. I'm not crazy. I swear to you, I'm not crazy." "I don't think you're crazy, Rodrigo," I said, and I meant it. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm a trauma nurse, and right now, I need you to help me figure out how to save your friend's life." I looked down at the being, whose breathing had become even more labored, the rise and fall of its chest erratic. I reached out slowly, telegraphing my movements, and placed my hand gently on what I assumed was its shoulder. The skin was cool to the touch, smooth, and I felt a faint vibration under my palm, like a very rapid heartbeat or some other internal process I couldn't identify. The being's large eyes focused on me, and in that moment, something extraordinary happened. I felt a presence in my mind. Not a voice, exactly, not words, but a transmission of information, emotion, intention. I sensed pain, yes, but also gratitude, and beneath that, a deep calm, an acceptance. The being knew it was dying. It wasn't afraid, but it wanted to live. The clarity of that communication was overwhelming, and tears suddenly blurred my vision. "I'm going to try to help you," I whispered, not knowing if it could understand English, but hoping that the intention behind my words would translate through whatever method it was using to connect with me. I began to clean the wound as gently as I could with saline-soaked gauze, watching as the luminescent fluid continued to seep out. The more I worked, the more I realized how utterly inadequate my training was for this situation. This wasn't human physiology. I didn't know what I was looking at, didn't know what needed to be preserved or could be safely removed, didn't know how to stop the bleeding or even if what was happening constituted bleeding in any sense I understood. Rodrigo stood beside me, holding a flashlight he'd found in the storage room, illuminating the work area. His hands had stopped shaking, and he watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as I tried to address the being's injuries. "I saw the crash," he said quietly, as if talking helped him process what was happening. "I was driving on Old Highway 60, out past Lake Pleasant. You know that area? It's all desert out there. Nothing for miles. And I saw these lights in the sky, bright white lights moving in ways that nothing I've ever seen moves, you know. Stopping, instantly, changing direction without slowing down, just impossible movements. Then, there was a flash, like lightning but different, more purple, and one of the lights came down fast, too fast, and hit the desert maybe half a mile from the road. I probably should have kept driving. My wife, she always tells me not to get involved in things that aren't my business. But I couldn't just leave. What if someone was hurt, you know? So I pulled over and grabbed my flashlight and walked out into the desert, following where I'd seen the light go down. He paused, swallowing hard. When I got there was this thing, this craft, half buried in the sand. It was smoking or steaming, hard to tell, and it was shaped like nothing I've ever seen, smooth and curved but also angular in places, made from a metal that looked almost alive, like it was moving or breathing. And lying next to it was this being, this person, whatever it is. At first I thought maybe it was someone in a costume, some kind of military thing, I don't know. But when I got close, I knew. You just know. You understand? This wasn't from here. This wasn't from Earth. I nodded, still working on the wound, trying to at least stop the flow of the luminescent fluid, which seemed to be slowing on its own. Though I didn't know if that was a good sign or meant the being was simply running out of whatever this substance was. "Did you see anything else?" I asked. "Anyone else? Any other vehicles?" "No," Rodrigo said. "Just the one craft and this one being." I looked around for maybe 5 minutes, but I kept feeling like I needed to get out of there, like something was coming, you know? Like I was being watched. So I wrapped it in the thermal blanket I keep in my truck, picked it up, it's lighter than you'd think, and I drove straight here. I didn't know what else to do. Calling 911 seemed like a bad idea. I've heard stories, you know, about what happens when people report things like this. They disappear, or they get discredited, or men in black suits show up and take everything away. I just wanted to help. I understood his fear. In that moment, I felt it too. A creeping awareness that what we were doing in this storage room, what we'd witnessed, would have consequences we couldn't predict. Somewhere, someone probably knew that this craft had crashed. Somewhere, powerful entities were likely already mobilizing to find it, to recover the evidence, to silence anyone who knew too much. But those concerns felt distant compared to the immediate reality of the dying being in front of me. I'd managed to pack the wound with gauze, and the bleeding, or whatever it was, had slowed significantly. The being's breathing had stabilized somewhat, still faster than human breathing, but more regular. I checked what I assumed was a pulse point on its thin wrist, feeling for any rhythm, and found something, a rapid flutter that might have been circulation. "I need to set up an IV, I said, more to myself. Then to Rodrigo. "It's losing fluid. It needs volume replacement. But I don't know what fluid to use. I don't know its biochemistry. Giving it saline might kill it faster than the wound." I was thinking aloud, running through options, when I felt that presence in my mind again, stronger this time. The being was trying to communicate something specific. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the sensation, and suddenly I saw an image, clear as a photograph, of a crystalline structure, complex and geometric, and I understood somehow that this was what I needed to look for inside the wound. Opened my eyes and looked down at the exposed internal structures. There, partially visible beneath the torn tissue, was a node that matched the image I'd seen, a small crystalline formation that was pulsing more weakly than the others around it. The being wanted me to do something with this structure, to stabilize it somehow. I didn't have the tools for microsurgery, didn't have any frame of reference for working with alien biology, but I had steady hands and a basic suture kit. Very carefully, using the finest needle and thread I had, I began to work around the damaged area, not trying to repair what was broken, but creating a kind of support structure with the sutures, pulling together the surrounding tissue to take pressure off the crystalline node. It took nearly an hour. Rodrigo held the flashlight without complaint, barely moving, and I worked with a focus I'd never experienced before. Every movement deliberate, guided partly by medical training and partly by those intuitive flashes of information that the being seemed to be transmitting to me. When I finally tied off the last suture and stepped back, my hands were cramping and my back ached from leaning over the gurney. The being's breathing had improved noticeably. The rapid, shallow gasps had given way to a deeper, more rhythmic pattern. The luminescent fluid had stopped leaking from the wound, and the crystalline structures I could see through the injury seemed to be pulsing more strongly, more regularly. The large almond eyes opened fully and focused on me with what I can only describe as gratitude so intense it felt like a physical force. "I think it's going to make it," I whispered, hardly believing the words even as I spoke them. Rodrigo let out a long breath and crossed himself, murmuring a prayer in Spanish. We stood there for a moment in the cluttered storage room, two humans from Phoenix, Arizona, watching an extraterrestrial being slowly stabilize on a gurney surrounded by outdated medical equipment and boxes of gauze. The impossibility of it all crashed over me in waves. This was real. This was happening. Everything I thought I knew about the universe, about humanity's place in it, about the nature of reality itself, had just been fundamentally challenged. And then I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. My heart jumped into my throat. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by voices, and I recognized one of them as Patricia, the charge nurse. They were coming toward the storage room. I looked at Rodrigo in panic. We couldn't let anyone else see this. I didn't know exactly why I was so certain of that, but every instinct I had screamed that exposing this being to the hospital administration, to the authorities, to the world, would be catastrophic. "Stay here," I whispered to Rodrigo. "Don't make a sound, I'll handle this." I slipped out of the storage room, closing the door quietly behind me, and stepped into the hallway just as Patricia rounded the corner with Tom, one of the security guards. "Sarah," Patricia said, looking surprised. "What are you doing back here? I've been looking for you. We've got an incoming trauma, ETA 3 minutes, motor vehicle accident on the 101, multiple casualties." "Sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice normal, professional. "I was just restocking supplies. I'll get back to the trauma bay right now." Patricia looked at me oddly, and I realized I must look disheveled, my scrubs probably stained with that luminescent fluid, my hands shaking slightly from fatigue and adrenaline. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You look pale." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired. Long shift. I'll grab some coffee and be ready for the incoming trauma." She nodded slowly, still looking concerned, but the urgency of the approaching ambulance took priority. "Okay, but after this case, take a break. You've been working hard tonight." I nodded and walked with them back toward the main emergency department, my mind racing. What was I going to do? I couldn't leave the being alone in that storage room indefinitely. Rodrigo couldn't stay there all night. Eventually someone would need supplies from that room, or security would do their rounds, or any number of things would lead to discovery. The next 2 hours were a blur of controlled chaos as we dealt with the motor vehicle accident. 3 patients with varying degrees of injury, none critical, but all requiring immediate attention. I went through the motions automatically, starting IVs, taking vitals, assisting the emergency physician with procedures, all while my mind was screaming about what was hidden in the storage room down the hall. Was the being still stable? Was Rodrigo okay? Had anyone discovered them? Finally, around 6 in the Morning. As the night shift was winding down and the early day shift staff were starting to trickle in, I managed to slip away. I practically ran to the storage room, unlocked the door with trembling fingers, and pushed inside. Rodrigo looked up at me with exhausted relief. The being was still on. The gurney, still breathing steadily, its eyes closed now in what might have been sleep or unconsciousness. "I have to leave soon," I whispered to Rodrigo. "My shift ends in an hour, and if I stay longer, people will ask questions. You need to leave too. But we can't leave it here." "What do we do?" Rodrigo asked, his voice hoarse. "Where can we take it?" I thought frantically. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom place in Tempe that I rented alone, but it was private, and I could control who came and went. It wasn't ideal, but I couldn't think of anywhere else. "My place," I said. "We'll take it to my apartment. I'll call in sick tomorrow, say I have the flu or something, and we'll figure out what to do next. But we have to move it now before day shift gets fully staffed." Together, we carefully lifted the being back into Rodrigo's arms, wrapping it again in the thermal blanket so it looked like we were transporting a patient in distress, which in a sense we were. I grabbed a wheelchair from the hallway and we positioned the being in it, the blanket covering its distinctive features. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone in the hospital must be able to hear it, but it was shift change, that chaotic 20 minutes when the night staff is tired and eager to leave, and the day staff is still getting oriented, and we managed to wheel the being right through the ambulance bay and out to Rodrigo's truck without anyone stopping us or asking questions. Rodrigo's truck was an old Ford F-150, dusty from desert driving, with construction equipment in the bed. We laid the being across the back seat as gently as we could, and I climbed in next to it, monitoring its breathing, which remained stable. Rodrigo drove carefully, following my directions to my apartment complex in Tempe, a bland, stucco building called Desert Palms that looked like every other low-rent complex in the Phoenix metro area. We pulled into the underground parking garage, and I was grateful for the early morning hour when most residents were still asleep. Getting the being from the truck to my apartment was terrifying. Every second I expected someone to emerge from a doorway, to see us carrying this blanket-wrapped form, to call the police or building security. But luck or providence or something else was with us, and we made it inside without being seen. My apartment was a mess, as it always was after a string of night shifts, dishes in the sink, clothes draped over furniture. But none of that mattered. We laid the being on my bed, the only place large enough and comfortable enough, and I pulled the blanket away to check its condition. The wound looked better than it had in the storage room. Whatever healing process I'd initiated with my clumsy suturing seemed to be continuing on its own. The crystalline structures visible through the injury were pulsing with a brighter light, and the surrounding tissue was showing signs of regeneration, new growth spreading across the damaged area in patterns that looked more like crystal formation than biological healing. Rodrigo and I stood there, staring down at an extraterrestrial being recovering on my bed in my Tempe apartment, and the absurdity of it all finally broke through my shock. I started laughing, a slightly hysterical laugh that I couldn't quite control, and Rodrigo joined in, and for a moment we were both just laughing and crying and trying to process the impossible reality we'd stumbled into. "What now?" Rodrigo finally asked, wiping his eyes. "I don't know," I admitted. "I have no idea what happens now." He gave me his phone number and his address, made me promise to call him if anything changed, and then he left, heading home to his wife and kids, to his normal life, leaving me alone with a being from another world. I called the hospital and left a message that I was sick, wouldn't be in for the next few shifts, and then I sat down in the chair next to my bed and watched the being breathe. Exhaustion was pulling at me, but I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with questions that had no answers. Where did this being come from? Why had it crashed in the Arizona desert? Were there others looking for it? What would happen when it woke up? And beneath all those practical concerns was a deeper question, a philosophical earthquake that was reshaping my entire understanding of existence. If this was real, if intelligent life from other worlds was real, then what did that mean about everything else? What did it mean about God, about religion, about humanity's supposed special place in creation? I'd been raised Catholic, baptized as an infant, confirmed as a teenager, though I drifted away from regular practice in my 20s. My mother still went to Mass every Sunday at our Lady of Perpetual Help in Scottsdale, still prayed the rosary, still believed with the simple certainty of someone who'd never seriously questioned their faith. What would she say about this? What would Father Martinez say if I brought this being to confession? The thought almost made me laugh. Again. The being slept, or whatever state of unconsciousness it was in, for the rest of the morning. I dozed in the chair, jerking awake every time it made a sound or moved, but mostly it lay still, its breathing steady, its strange body slowly healing itself. Around noon, I was startled by a presence in my mind again, stronger than before, and I opened my eyes to find the being looking directly at me. Its large almond eyes were fully open, alert, and that sense of communication flooded through me. Not words but concepts, emotions, information transferred in ways I couldn't explain. I understood that it was thanking me, that it recognized what I'd done to save its life, that it was recovering but needed time, that it meant me no harm and was grateful beyond measure for my help. And then it communicated something that stopped my heart. It showed me an image, a vision, really, of Earth from space, our blue marble hanging in the darkness, and then that image zoomed in to show networks of light. Not city lights, but something else. Patterns of energy that seemed to connect different points on the planet's surface. And in these networks, I saw nodes, bright spots, where the energy was particularly concentrated, and I recognized some of them. Jerusalem, Mecca, Rome, Varanasi, sacred sites, holy places. The being was showing me that it knew about these places, that it had been studying them, that there was a connection between what humans called spirituality and something much larger, much more complex, something that spanned the cosmos. I felt tears streaming down my face as I absorbed this information. The being species, I understood, had been observing Earth for a very long time. They knew about human religions, about our concepts of the divine, about our struggles to understand our place in the universe. And they knew something that we didn't, something profound about the nature of consciousness, about what we called the soul, about the fundamental reality underlying all existence. But before I could process this revelation further, before I could ask the 1,000 questions burning in my mind, I heard a knock at my door. A gentle knock, not aggressive but firm and intentional. I froze. Nobody was supposed to know I was home. Nobody should be visiting me in the middle of the day on a Tuesday. I looked at the being, whose eyes had widened, and I felt a wave of concern emanating from it. Not fear exactly, but a sense that whoever was at the door was significant. I walked slowly to my front door and looked through the peephole. What I saw made my knees go weak. Standing in the hallway outside my apartment was a man I'd never seen before, but who looked somehow familiar in a way I couldn't place. He was tall, with olive skin and dark hair, dressed in simple clothes, jeans and a white button-down shirt. But it was his eyes that made me catch my breath. They were warm, infinitely kind, and when he looked directly at the peephole, directly at me, I felt seen in a way I'd never experienced before. Seen and known and loved all at once. He knocked again and spoke, his voice gentle but carrying easily through the door. "Sarah, I know you're there. I know what you're sheltering. Please, let me in. There's very little time, And there's much you need to understand. My hand was shaking as I reached for the door handle. Every rational part of my brain was screaming not to open it, not to let a stranger into my apartment, especially not with an alien being recovering in my bedroom. But something deeper than rationality was moving me, a certainty that felt like it came from outside myself, and I found myself unlocking the deadbolt and opening the door. The man smiled at me, a smile of such genuine warmth that I felt some of my fear dissolve. "Thank you," he said. "May I come in?" I stepped back, unable to speak, and he entered my apartment, closing the door gently behind him. He looked around the small living room, taking in the details with what seemed like affection rather than judgment, and then his gaze moved toward the bedroom door. "Your guest is recovering well," he said. "You did exactly what needed to be done, Sarah. You saved a life that was precious beyond your understanding, and in doing so, you've changed your own path in ways you can't yet imagine." "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something that made the world stop. Depths beyond depths, an infinite compassion, a knowing that encompassed everything, past and future, every joy and every sorrow that had ever been or would ever be. "I think you know," he said gently. "Not with your mind, perhaps, but with your heart. You know who I am." And I did. The knowing hit me like a physical force, so overwhelming that I had to sit down on my couch before my legs gave out completely. This man, standing in my living room, this person who radiated a presence so profound that reality itself seemed to bend around him, was Jesus. Not a vision, not a hallucination, not a symbol or a metaphor, but the actual, physical, impossible presence of Jesus Christ in my apartment in Tempe, Arizona. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask the million questions exploding in my mind, but he held up a hand gently. "Before you ask why I'm here, let me show you something," he said. He walked to my bedroom door and opened it. The being on my bed turned its head to look at him, and I felt a surge of recognition pass between them, a connection deeper than anything I'd experienced in their previous communications with me. Jesus walked to the bedside and placed his hand on the being's head, a gesture so tender, so full of love, that I started crying again, without knowing exactly why. "This one is my beloved," Jesus said, and his voice carried a weight of infinite affection. "As are you. As are all who live and breathe and seek and suffer and hope. You think you understand what I am, Sarah, but you've been taught a story that's too small, a narrative that confines divinity to one planet, one species, one way of understanding. The truth is so much larger, so much more beautiful than your religions have dared to imagine." He turned to look at me, and I felt pinned by his gaze, seen in every aspect of my being, all my doubts and fears and secret shames laid bare. But instead of judgment, there was only love. When I walked the earth 2,000 years ago in that small corner of the Middle East, I told you that I had other sheep, not of that fold, that I would bring them also. Do you remember those words? I nodded, recognizing the reference from the Gospel of John, verses I'd heard read at Mass, but never really thought about deeply. "I meant it literally," he continued. "This being, this soul recovering on your bed, comes from a flock. I tend on a world circling a star you call Tau Ceti, 12 light years from here. I have walked on their world as I walked on yours. I have taught and healed and loved them as I have loved humanity. And there are others, Sarah, so many others, scattered across this vast universe, all children of the same divine source, all precious, all worthy of love and redemption." My mind was reeling. Everything I'd been taught about Christianity, about Jesus as the unique Son of God who came to save humanity specifically, was being turned inside out. Not negated exactly, but expanded so vastly that could barely comprehend the implications. "But the Bible," I stammered. "The church. They never mentioned. Why wouldn't you tell us?" "I did tell you," he said patiently. "I told you in every way I could given the limitations of your understanding at that time. I spoke of many mansions in my Father's house. I spoke of mysteries that had not yet been revealed. I promised that the Spirit would guide you into all truth. But truth unfolds in its time, Sarah. Humanity wasn't ready 2,000 years ago to understand that you were not alone in the cosmos. That divinity embraced a universe filled with countless worlds and countless forms of life. You could barely comprehend the idea that salvation extended beyond the chosen people to the Gentiles. How could you have grasped the cosmic scope of divine love?" He sat down on the edge of my bed next to the being, and I noticed that his presence seemed to accelerate its healing. The crystalline structures were glowing brighter, and the wound was closing visibly, tissue regenerating in real time. "The religions of earth have preserved important truths," he continued. "The reality of the divine, the call to love, and compassion, the possibility of transcendence and communion with the sacred. But they have also limited those truths, confined them in boxes made of human fear and tribal thinking. I came to your world to reveal divine love, but humans inevitably shaped that revelation according to their own understanding, their own needs, their own limited vision. Some of what was written about me is accurate. Much of it is interpretation, filtered through cultural lenses and political agendas, and the very human desire to claim exclusive access to truth. I thought about the centuries of religious conflict, the crusades and inquisitions and holy wars, all fought in his name, all claiming to defend the one true faith, and I felt a wave of something like grief for all the suffering caused by humanity's insistence on making God too small. "Why are you here now?" I asked. "Why reveal this to me?" "Because you were willing to see," he said simply. "You looked at a being that was utterly alien, completely outside your frame of reference, and your response was compassion, not fear. You risked your career, your safety, your entire understanding of reality to save a life. That openness, that love, is what I've always taught. And it's what the world desperately needs to understand if humanity is going to survive what's coming." "What's coming?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice. He looked at me with infinite gentleness. "Contact, Sarah. Full, undeniable contact with other intelligent species. It's closer than you think, and when it happens, it will shatter many comfortable certainties. Those who have built their faith on the idea that humans are the center of creation, the sole focus of divine attention, will face a crisis unlike anything in your history. Some will adapt, will expand their understanding to embrace a larger truth. Others will reject it entirely, will call these visitors demons or deceptions, will fight to preserve their limited vision, even if it means violence and division." He paused, and his eyes grew sad. "I'm here to prepare you, and through you, others. You're going to speak about what you've experienced. You're going to share this testimony, and many won't believe you. Some will call you crazy. Others will be threatened by what you represent, and will try to silence you. But there will also be those who hear your story and feel a recognition, a knowing that what you're saying is true, and they will begin to open themselves to a larger reality." I felt the weight of that responsibility settle on me, and I wanted to refuse it, to tell him to choose someone else, someone stronger, someone more qualified. But looking at his face, at the absolute certainty and love there, I knew that refusal wasn't an option. I had been chosen, not because I was special, but because I had been willing to act with compassion when it mattered most. "What do I do?" I asked. "With my guest, I mean. It can't stay here forever." "Are there others coming to retrieve it?" "Its people are coming," he confirmed. They're tracking the emergency beacon its ship sent before it crashed. They'll be here within 3 days. Until then, keep it safe. Keep it hidden. Let it heal. And learn from it, Sarah. This being has much to teach you about the nature of consciousness, about the technologies of compassion that its civilization has developed, about ways of being that humanity has yet to discover. He stood up, and I knew he was preparing to leave. Panic surged through me. There were so many questions I hadn't asked, so much I didn't understand. "Wait," I said desperately. "Please, I need to know. Is everything I believed a lie? Is the church wrong? Should I stop going to Mass with my mother? What about prayer, about the sacraments, about all the practices I was raised with?" He turned back to me with infinite patience. "The church is not wrong, Sarah. It's incomplete. There is truth in your liturgy, in your prayers, in the sacraments you celebrate. The act of gathering in community to acknowledge the sacred, to share bread and wine in remembrance of sacrifice and love. These are profound practices. But they are one expression of truth, not the only expression. On the world where your guest comes from, they have their own practices, their own ways of connecting with the divine, and those are equally valid, equally pleasing to the source of all being." He stepped closer to me, and I felt surrounded by a presence, so vast and loving that I could barely breathe. "Don't abandon your faith, Sarah. Expand it. Keep what is true and good and beautiful in the traditions you inherited, but let go of the walls that separate you from others who seek the same divine reality by different paths. God is not a Christian, or a Muslim, or a Buddhist, or anything else humans have named and claimed. God is the ground of all being, the source from which everything flows, and that source embraces all of creation with equal love." He reached out and touched my forehead gently, and in that touch, I felt something shift inside me, a kind of activation or awakening. Like channels of perception I didn't know I had were suddenly open. "You'll understand more in time," he said. "Trust what you've experienced. Trust your own compassion. And when the time comes to speak, don't be afraid. The truth you carry will find those who need to hear it." And then, impossibly, he was simply gone. Not walking out the door, not fading away like a special effect in a movie, just instantly absent, as if he'd never been there at all. I stood in my living room, shaking, tears streaming down my face, my entire understanding of existence fundamentally transformed. I want to pause here and ask you something directly. Have you ever had an experience that you couldn't explain? Something that challenged everything you thought you knew? Maybe you've seen something in the sky that moved in ways no aircraft could move. Maybe you've felt a presence, a knowing, a connection to something beyond the ordinary world. Maybe you've looked into the eyes of another person or an animal and felt a recognition so deep it seemed to transcend individual identity. If any of this resonates with you, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are millions of us who've touched the edge of something larger, who've glimpsed the reality that exists beyond the carefully controlled narrative we're fed by institutions and authorities who benefit from keeping us small and afraid and separate. This channel exists for us, for the seekers and the witnesses and the ones who know there's more to existence than we're being told. If you feel called to be part of this community, please leave a comment below. You can write something simple like, "I've experienced the unexplainable," or "I know there's more to reality," or just, "I believe you." Whatever feels right. Share your own experiences if you feel safe doing so. Let's build a community of truth-tellers, a network of awakened souls who can support each other as the old certainties crumble and a larger truth emerges. And if you're too afraid to comment publicly, that's okay too. Just knowing you're out there, reading this, opening yourself to these possibilities, is enough. You're part of this awakening whether you speak up or not. Now, let me tell you what happened over the next 3 days, because that's when everything I thought I understood got challenged even further. The being's name, I learned through our wordless communication, was something I couldn't pronounce with human vocal cords, but the closest approximation in English would be Kyle. Over the 3 days we spent together in my apartment, Kyle taught me things that textbooks and universities, and all the accumulated knowledge of human civilization had never approached. The first thing I understood was that consciousness, what we call the soul or the mind or awareness, isn't confined to biological brains. It's a fundamental property of the universe itself, like gravity or electromagnetism, and biological organisms are simply vessels that allow this universal consciousness to have localized, individualized experiences. What we think of as me, the Sarah Mitchell who was born in Phoenix in 1993, who went to nursing school and works night shifts and worries about paying bills, is just one temporary expression of something vast and eternal. The being I called Kyle came from a civilization that had understood this for millennia. They'd developed technologies and practices that allowed them to work with consciousness directly, to heal not just bodies, but the deeper patterns of awareness itself. That's why the injury I'd treated in Kale wasn't just physical. The crystalline structures I'd sewn together were consciousness nodes, connection points where individual awareness interfaced with the larger field of universal consciousness. Damaging them was like damaging someone's ability to connect with their own soul. Kyle showed me that what humans call spirituality, what we experience in prayer or meditation or moments of transcendence, is actually the awareness temporarily expanding beyond its individual vessel to touch the infinite field from which we all emerge. Every genuine mystical experience in human history, every vision of prophets and saints, every moment of enlightenment reported by spiritual practitioners across all traditions was exactly this. Consciousness recognizing its own true nature, seeing beyond the illusion of separation. And here's what shook me to my core. Kyle's people had been visiting Earth for thousands of years, not to conquer or exploit, but to study and sometimes to guide. They were the lights in the sky reported throughout human history, the divine messengers and angels and gods and spirits that populate every culture's mythology. Not all of them, Kyle explained. Some of those experiences were purely human imagination or natural phenomena misunderstood, but many were real encounters with other intelligences, other expressions of consciousness in different vessels, visiting Earth for various reasons. Some, like Kale's people, came as observers and occasional helpers, drawn by their sense of kinship with a younger species struggling to understand its place in the cosmos. Others came for resources, for study, for purposes that were neutral or even beneficial from their perspective, though sometimes frightening to the humans who encountered them. And a few came with intentions that could only be described as hostile, though Kale assured me these were rare and usually prevented from causing significant harm by agreements among the various species that monitored developing worlds like Earth. But the most staggering revelation was about Jesus himself, about the being I'd encountered in my apartment. Kyle explained that what humans understood as Jesus, as the Christ, as the divine made flesh, was real, but not in the limited way Christian theology had framed it. The consciousness that incarnated in the body of the Jewish carpenter 2,000 years ago was the same consciousness that had incarnated on Kale's world 8,000 years ago, and on dozens of other worlds across the galaxy, always appearing in a form appropriate to that species, always teaching the same essential truths about love and compassion and the interconnection of all beings, always pointing toward the reality of universal consciousness that humans called God. This wasn't deception, or aliens pretending to be divine, Kale showed me. This was how the divine actually worked. The infinite source of all. Consciousness couldn't be contained in a single form, couldn't be limited to one species or one world. So it expressed itself repeatedly, taking on flesh in countless contexts, teaching the same lessons adapted to different cultures and different levels of understanding, all in service of the same goal. helping localized consciousness remember its connection to the infinite. I sat on my couch, absorbing this information through the wordless communication that flowed between us, and I felt my mind expanding to accommodate truths too large for the frameworks I'd inherited. Everything my Catholic education had taught me about Jesus as the unique Son of God, the one-time incarnation of divinity sent specifically to save humanity from sin, was both true and far too limited. Yes, the divine had taken human form in Jesus of Nazareth. Yes, his teachings and sacrifice and resurrection were real expressions of infinite love reaching toward humanity. But this same divine love had reached toward Cale's people and countless others, wearing different faces, speaking different languages, always adapting to meet each species where they were. Why doesn't everyone know this? I asked. Cale threw our mental connection and felt the answer flow back to me. Because knowing it requires a level of spiritual maturity that most humans haven't reached yet. Because the institutions that control religious narratives have too much invested in their exclusive claims to truth. Because acknowledging that other intelligences exist, that they've been visiting Earth throughout history, that some of what we call divine was actually contact with advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, would destabilize every power structure on the planet. The governments know, Cale showed me, at least some factions within the most powerful governments know about extraterrestrial visitation and have known for decades. They've recovered crashed craft, they've had contact with various species, they've back-engineered some technologies, and they've worked very hard to keep this information from the public. Not primarily out of concern for preventing panic, though that's the justification they use, but because disclosure would mean sharing technologies that would eliminate scarcity, that would make fossil fuels obsolete, that would undermine the economic and political systems through which a small elite maintains control over the majority. I felt anger rising in me as I understood the scope of the deception. How many problems humanity struggled with, from climate change to poverty to conflict over resources, could be addressed if we had access to the technologies these visitors possessed? How much suffering could be alleviated? How much violence prevented? And it was all being suppressed to maintain the power of a few. But Cale's response to my anger was gentle, patient. Forced disclosure would cause its own problems, I was shown. Humanity needs to reach a certain level of collective maturity before full contact can happen safely. Right now, many humans would respond to undeniable proof of extraterrestrial intelligence with fear, with violence, with attempts to weaponize any technology they could access. The very governments suppressing the truth are also, in some ways, preventing premature contact that could be catastrophic. What was needed wasn't a dramatic revelation imposed from above, but a gradual awakening, individual by individual, as people like me shared our experiences and helped others expand their understanding. That's why Cale's people had allowed some contacts to become public, had permitted some witnesses to speak, had left some evidence where it could be found. They were seeding awareness, preparing humanity for the inevitable moment when contact could no longer be hidden. We spent hours in this kind of communion, Cale healing and teaching, me absorbing and questioning, both of us existing in a space that felt outside normal time. I barely ate, barely slept, sustained by something beyond physical food. My mother called twice, leaving worried messages that I couldn't bring myself to return. How could I explain what was happening? How could I go back to normal conversations about grocery shopping and her bridge club when I was learning the fundamental nature of reality from an extraterrestrial being recovering in my bedroom? On the third day, as evening fell and the phoenix sky turned that particular shade of orange and purple that happens in the desert, Cale suddenly became alert. I felt a surge of communication, a mixture of joy and anticipation and slight sadness. They're here, I understood. Cale's people had arrived. I went to my bedroom window and looked up at the sky. At first I saw nothing, unusual. Just the normal twilight deepening into night, the first stars becoming visible. Then I noticed a star that was moving, tracking across the sky in a way that no satellite or aircraft moved, with smooth acceleration and sudden stops that defied physics as I understood it. The star grew, brighter, closer, and within minutes, I could see it clearly. A craft of some kind, larger than I'd expected, shaped like a flattened disk with lights along its edges that pulsed in patterns that seemed almost communicative. It hovered above my apartment complex, and I waited for alarms, for people, running into the streets, for panic, or at least amazed observation. But nothing happened. The other residents seemed oblivious, as if the massive craft hanging in the sky above them was invisible. Only I could see it, or perhaps only those in connection with Cale. The craft descended silently into the parking lot behind my building, settling onto the asphalt with no sound, no disturbance of air, no physical effect that I could detect. A door opened in its side, though I hadn't seen any seams or obvious openings in the smooth surface, and two beings emerged. They looked similar to Kyle, the same general body plan and proportions, though I sensed they were different individuals with their own distinct presences. I helped Cale stand, supporting the still healing body as we made our way out of my apartment and down the stairs to the parking lot. The two beings approached, and I felt waves of gratitude emanating from them, directed at me with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. They communicated something that I understood as profound thanks for saving their family member, for showing compassion to a stranger, for risking myself without expectation of reward. Then Cale turned to me, and I felt a final communication, a message that burned itself into my memory with perfect clarity. Tell them what you've witnessed, Kyle showed me. Tell them about the larger reality, about the divine love that embraces all conscious beings, about the truth that their religions glimpsed but could not fully articulate. Tell them they are not alone, have never been alone, that the universe is filled with life and consciousness and an infinite love that humans call God, but is so much more than any name can contain. You will be doubted, dismissed, attacked, but you will also be believed by those ready to hear. Trust what you know. Trust what you've experienced. And remember that serving life in any form, showing compassion to any conscious being, is serving the divine itself. With that, Kyle walked toward the craft, supported by the two who had come to retrieve their wounded companion. They boarded the vessel, the door sealed behind them with no visible trace, and the craft lifted silently into the night sky, accelerating impossibly fast until it was once again just a bright point of light, then gone, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot behind my apartment building in Tempe, Arizona. I stood there for a long time, looking up at the stars, seeing them differently now, knowing that many of them were suns with worlds circling them, and that on some of those worlds, life had emerged and evolved and reached toward the cosmos, seeking connection, seeking understanding, seeking the divine reality that underlies all existence. When I finally went back to my apartment, it felt empty in a way it never had before. The being I'd sheltered was gone, but the knowledge I'd gained remained, burning in my mind like a fire that could never be extinguished. I sat down and started writing, documenting everything that had happened, knowing even as I wrote that many would dismiss it as fantasy or delusion or attention-seeking lies. But I also knew that somewhere out there, someone would read my words and recognize the truth in them, would feel the resonance of their own suppressed experiences and questions and intuitions. Over the next weeks and months, I struggled with what to do with my testimony. I returned to work at the hospital, went through the motions of my normal life. But everything felt different now, seen through the lens of what I'd learned. I looked at my patients differently, seeing beyond their physical bodies to the consciousness that animated them. recognizing in each one the same divine spark that existed in Cale, that existed in me, that existed in all beings throughout the cosmos. I went to Mass with my mother sitting in the pew at Our Lady of Perpetual Help, listening to Father Martinez give his homily about Jesus as the good shepherd who knows his sheep, and I heard the words differently now. Yes, Jesus was the good shepherd, but his flock was so much larger than anyone in that church imagined, spanning worlds and species and forms of life we couldn't conceive. When we sang the hymns, when we took communion, when we prayed together, I felt the power in those rituals, the genuine connection to something sacred that they facilitated. But I also felt the limitations, the walls that the institution had built around the infinite, confining divine love to one species, one revelation, one path. I tried to talk to Father Martinez once, carefully, testing the waters, asking hypothetical questions about whether there might be other worlds with other beings and how that would fit with Christian theology. He smiled indulgently, treating my questions like interesting intellectual puzzles, but ultimately dismissing them as speculative distractions from the clear truth revealed in Scripture. I realized then that institutional religion, for all the truth it preserved, was also a cage, and those who'd spent their lives within it often couldn't see the bars. I started attending a UFO experiencer support group that met in a community center in Mesa. There were about 20 people who came regularly, sharing stories of sightings and encounters, experiences that had left them confused and seeking understanding. Some of their stories were clearly misidentifications or wishful thinking, but others rang with the authenticity of genuine contact. I shared my own experience carefully, leaving out the part about Jesus, afraid that detail would be too much, too likely to sound like religious delusion grafted onto an alien encounter. The group received my story with a mixture of belief and skepticism, but several people approached me afterward, wanting to talk more privately. One woman, a grandmother named Patricia, who'd had multiple sightings over decades, told me that she'd also been given information about consciousness and divinity during her encounters, and that the beings had told her something similar to what I'd learned. That what humans called God was real but vastly different from religious conceptions. That it was the universal consciousness from which all individual awareness emerged. Hearing this from someone else, knowing that I wasn't alone in receiving this message, gave me courage. I started speaking more openly, first just with individuals who seemed ready to hear, then in small group settings, and eventually, as word spread and interest grew, in larger venues. I created this YouTube channel as a way to share my testimony with those who couldn't attend in person, and the response has been overwhelming. Thousands of you have watched, commented, shared your own experiences, formed connections with others who understand. We're building something here, a community of awakened souls who are ready to embrace a larger truth. But I need to be honest with you about the costs. Since I started speaking publicly, I've lost friends who think I'm delusional. My relationship with my mother has become strained. She prays for my soul and worries that I've been deceived by demons. The hospital administration suggested I take a mental health leave. And though I haven't been officially fired, I've been quietly pushed out of the job I loved. I've received threatening messages from people who see my testimony as an attack on Christianity or as dangerous, misinformation that needs to be silenced. There have been other consequences too, stranger ones. I've noticed cars that seem to follow me, always different vehicles but with a similar quality of deliberate surveillance. My apartment has been broken into twice, though nothing was stolen, almost as if someone was searching for evidence or planting bugs. I've had visits from men in suits claiming to be from various government agencies, asking questions about my claims and suggesting I consider the harm my false stories might cause to public peace and order. I don't know exactly who they represent, whether they're genuinely from government programs investigating UFO phenomena or private contractors working for corporate interests threatened by the implications of disclosure. But their message is clear. Powerful forces would prefer I stay silent. But I can't stay silent. What I witnessed, what I learned, is too important. And I'm not the only one sharing this message. All around the world, people are coming forward with their experiences, witnesses and contactees and researchers who've spent decades investigating the suppressed reality of extraterrestrial visitation. The old paradigm is cracking. The carefully maintained wall between acceptable reality and the larger truth is developing fissures. And soon, I believe very soon, it's going to shatter completely. When that happens, when full contact becomes undeniable and the governments can no longer suppress the truth, humanity is going to face a choice. We can respond with fear and violence, seeing these other beings as threats to be defended against, competitors for resources, enemies in a cosmic struggle for survival. Or we can respond with the compassion and openness that I showed to Kale, recognizing these visitors as kin, fellow expressions of the same divine consciousness, fellow seekers of truth and meaning in an incomprehensibly vast universe. The religious institutions are going to face a crisis too. Some will adapt, will expand their theologies to embrace the cosmic scope of divine love. I've already seen signs of this. Progressive theologians and spiritual leaders who are incorporating the reality of extraterrestrial intelligence into their understanding of creation and redemption. But others will resist, will cling to their exclusive claims, will denounce the visitors as demonic, deceptions designed to lead humanity astray from the one true faith. There will be division and conflict, and it will be painful. But on the other side of that crisis, if we navigate it with wisdom and compassion, lies a potential for transformation, unlike anything in human history. Imagine a world where we have access to technologies that provide clean, abundant energy for everyone, where scarcity is eliminated and the conflicts driven by competition for resources become obsolete. Imagine a world where we understand consciousness well enough to heal not just physical ailments but psychological trauma, addiction, the deep wounds that drive so much human suffering. Imagine a world where we see ourselves as one young species among many, in a cosmos filled with life, where our tribal divisions of race and nation and religion are recognized as the temporary, arbitrary boundaries they've always been. Imagine a world where we practice spirituality with full awareness that the divine is infinite, accessible through many paths, never confined to one revelation or one people. That world is possible. It's what Kyle's people have achieved, and what dozens of other civilizations have achieved, each in their own way. But it requires growth, maturity, a willingness to let go of comfortable certainties and embrace a larger, more challenging truth. It requires us to expand our circle of compassion beyond our own species, to recognize consciousness and therefore sacred worth in beings who look nothing like us. It requires us to humble ourselves, to accept that humanity is neither the center of creation nor the pinnacle of evolution, but simply one expression of universal consciousness among countless others. And it requires something even harder, forgiving those who've suppressed the truth for so long. The government officials and corporate leaders and religious authorities who've maintained the cover-up did so partly out of self-interest, yes, but also partly out of genuine fear of how humanity might respond to disclosure. They've carried a heavy burden, knowing a truth they believed most people weren't ready for, making decisions about what to reveal and what to hide with imperfect information and often sincere intentions to prevent chaos and harm. I don't excuse the deception, and I think the suppression of technologies that could have alleviated suffering was morally wrong. But I also understand the complexity of their position, and I know that moving forward, we'll need to find a way to truth and reconciliation rather than blame and division. I've thought a lot about Jesus telling me that I would speak, and some would believe while others would dismiss or attack. I've lived that prophecy now. I've experienced both the joy of connection with those who hear truth in my words and the pain of rejection by those who can't or won't open themselves to this larger reality. And I've come to understand that my role isn't to convince everyone, isn't to prove beyond doubt what I experienced. My role is simply to testify, to share what I witnessed, and to trust that those who are ready will recognize the truth when they encounter it. You're watching this video, which means at some level you're ready, at least to consider the possibility that reality is stranger and more wonderful than you've been told. What you do with that openness is up to you. You can dismiss what I've shared as fantasy or delusion, file it away as an entertaining story, but ultimately not credible. You can sit with it, let it percolate in your consciousness, see how it resonates with your own experiences and intuitions. Or you can take the leap, can commit yourself to seeking truth wherever it leads, even if it means leaving behind certainties you've relied on, even if it means facing ridicule or rejection from those still bound by the old paradigm. Whichever path you choose, I want you to know this. You are loved with an infinite, unconditional love that embraces all of creation. The divine reality that some call God and others call universal consciousness, and still others know by different names, is not distant or judgmental or concerned with your adherence to specific doctrines. It is the very ground of your being, the source from which your awareness emerges, and to which it will return, and it knows you completely, loves you totally, just as you are. What I learned from Kale and from my encounter with Jesus is that the whole point of existence, the reason consciousness individualizes itself in billions of separate beings across countless worlds, is experience, is love, is the infinite exploring itself through the eyes of the finite. Every joy you feel, every connection you make, every act of compassion you perform, every moment of wonder and beauty and transcendence. These are the universe knowing itself, the divine experiencing its own nature through your particular perspective. And yes, every suffering, every loss, every mistake and failure and darkness, these too are part of the vast tapestry of experience, moments when consciousness explores the full range of what it means to be alive, to be vulnerable, to be in relationship with others who can hurt us and whom we can hurt. None of it is wasted. All of it matters. Your life matters, every moment of it, not because you're following the right rules or believing the right doctrines, but because you are a unique expression of infinite consciousness that has never existed before and will never exist again in exactly this form. When you die, your individual perspective will dissolve back into the universal consciousness from which it emerged. But the experiences you've gathered, the love you've shared, the growth you've achieved, these become part of the infinite forever. You are eternal because you are made of the eternal, and death is not an ending but a transformation, a return to wholeness, while retaining all that you've learned and become. This is what Jesus taught when he spoke of resurrection, what the Buddha taught when he spoke of nirvana, what every genuine mystic across every tradition has tried to communicate in the language and symbols of their time and place. And it's what Kale's people have known for thousands of years, what every sufficiently advanced civilization eventually discovers when they turn their attention inward and explore the nature of consciousness itself. We're on the verge of humanity making that discovery collectively, not just as isolated individuals who have mystical experiences, but as a species reaching a new level of awareness. The contact that's coming, the disclosure that can't be prevented much longer, will be the catalyst for that leap in consciousness. It will force us to confront questions we've avoided, to expand our understanding, to recognize our place in a much larger cosmic community. And, yes, it will be difficult. There will be fear and confusion and conflict as old certainties crumble. There will be those who respond with violence, who try to reassert control through force. There will be suffering as systems collapse and new ones are born. But on the other side, if we can navigate this transition with wisdom, lies a future more beautiful than we can currently imagine. I've seen glimpses of it in the information Kale shared with me, visions of what humanity could become if we choose love over fear, openness over defensiveness, truth over comfortable lies. A future where we're a future, part of a galactic community, contributing our unique human perspective to the ongoing cosmic conversation. A future where suffering has been minimized through technology and wisdom, where consciousness is understood and nurtured, where the barriers between self and other are recognized as illusions that can be transcended while still honoring the beauty of individual experience. A future where we look back on this moment, on the early 21st century when disclosure was happening and consciousness was shifting, and we see it as the birth of a new humanity, no less significant than the Hue moment when our ancestors first looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. We're living in that moment now. You and I, we're the ones who get to witness this transformation, to participate in it, to help shape the direction it takes. That's an incredible privilege and an awesome responsibility. So I'm asking you, if this testimony has resonated with you, if it's touched something true in your own experience or intuition, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with others who might be ready to hear it. Start conversations about these topics with people in your life. Seek out communities of fellow truth seekers. And most importantly, trust your own direct experience over any authority that tells you to disbelieve what you've witnessed. The divine speaks to each of us directly, not just through ancient texts or official interpreters, but in the quiet moments of connection and wonder and knowing that arise in our lives. Your experiences of the transcendent are valid. Your questions about reality are valid. Your sense that there's more to existence than the materialist paradigm acknowledges is valid. You don't need anyone's permission to explore these territories, and you don't need to wait for official disclosure to begin expanding your consciousness and preparing for the larger reality that's emerging. Thank you for watching this testimony. Thank you for being open to considering a truth that challenges everything we've been taught. Thank you for being part of this community of awakened souls. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories coming, more testimonies from people who've encountered the extraordinary and are brave enough to speak about it despite the personal costs. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss when these new stories are shared. And consider supporting this work if you're able, because sharing suppressed truths in an environment hostile to disclosure comes with financial costs as well as personal ones. Leave a comment below sharing your own experiences, or even just letting me know that this resonated with you. Seeing those comments, knowing that there are others out there who understand, gives me strength to continue speaking despite the opposition. And if you know others who are seeking truth, who question the official narratives, who sense that reality is stranger and more wonderful than we're told, please share this video with them. Every person who awakens to the larger truth brings us one step closer to the collective transformation that's coming. I'll end with this. The being I saved was an extraterrestrial from a world 12 light years away, but it was also my family, my kin, a fellow expression of the same divine consciousness that animates all beings. And so are you. We're all in this together, all part of the same cosmic story, all manifestations of infinite love exploring itself through the experiences of the finite. May you walk in that awareness. May you see the divine in every being you encounter. May you contribute your unique voice to the great awakening that's unfolding. And may you know always that you are loved beyond measure, that your existence matters profoundly, and that the truth you seek is seeking you just as earnestly. Stay curious, stay compassionate, stay open to the impossible becoming possible. The universe is so much stranger and more beautiful than we've dared to imagine, and we're just beginning to glimpse the truth of it. More revelations are coming. More contact is coming. More transformation is coming, and we'll navigate it together, one awakened soul at a time, until the critical mass is reached and the old paradigm shatters completely, giving birth to a new humanity ready to take its place among the cosmic community of conscious beings. I'm Sarah Mitchell, I'm Sarah. And this is my testimony. This is what they don't want you to know. This is the truth that will set us free. Thank you, truly, from the depths of my being, for hearing me, for believing, for being willing to question everything in service of truth. Together we are building the new world, one conversation at a time, one awakening at a time, one act of courage at a time. The future is bright beyond imagining, and it begins now, with us, with this community, with the choice we make every day to live in truth rather than comfortable illusion. Blessings on your journey, fellow seeker. Until the next testimony, until the next revelation, until the great disclosure that's coming sooner than anyone realizes, stay strong in your knowing, trust what you've experienced, and remember always that you are not alone, have never been alone, and never will be alone in this vast, conscious, loving universe that is our home and our destiny.